My name is Lisa Nielsen, and I have a blog called The Innovative Educator, and I also run a group called The Innovative Educator. And actually, through my blog, I was asked to publish a book, and I have a book called Teaching Generation Text. I've been an educator for over a decade, serving as both an educator and an administrator, and really what I do is help young people learn in innovative ways that are engaging and authentic. I do not feel many parents realize the options that are available today to them. Many people think that how they were educated is how their children will and can be educated. So one area that thinking about alternatives starts to come up is around testing. And so one of the things I do is I help parents learn the real rules about opting out of testing. Now, in many cases, schools have made it very difficult for children who want to opt out of testing, to the point where they've even gotten ill and the schools still are trying to demand that the children come. At that point, I often suggest to families that you don't have the option just to opt out of testing, but opting out of school is another option available to you. And in so many cases, both have never occurred to them. Both opting out of testing has never occurred, and opting out of school has never occurred to them. As a result of that, I wrote the Teenager's Guide to Opting Out of School for Success. And that's really geared toward teenagers that want to opt out and didn't even know it was possible, and it helps them think about how they can convince their parents to let them do that. Now, many parents don't believe that they can opt their children out of school because they're working. So as a result of that, I wrote the Working Home Educators Guide to Success. So the Working Home Educators Guide to Success shows many examples of working parents who are home educating their children. So my intent is just to show people that there are many ways. And then in addition to the books and guides that I write, I have groups for an opt-out of testing group for every state in the United States. And you can get to that on Facebook by just searching opt-out and the name of your state. And then I also have a group for people who are interested in home education. And my group is really geared toward those people who did not know that this was a possibility. So it connects them with very experienced home educators as well as others who are new to that, and helps connect them to a whole bunch of resources in order to do that. And then the opt-out groups connect parents in ways that they never before were able to connect. Because one of the benefits that schools and the government had in the past is there was no great way for people to connect, and social media has really changed that. So now they can, as I said, just look up opt out, their state, and they can instantly find many other parents in their state. And then I also have a website that's connected to every state that people can share the opt-out rules and information that they've found from state to state. So to answer your question in the beginning, no, many parents do not realize that they have options, and they don't even feel like they have a right to have much of a say in their children's education. They feel like the schools are the ones who should have that right. And there are states where they've actually passed laws saying that the school and the government's rights surpass parental right. And that's something that I try to help parents work through so that they're the ones who are making the decisions for their kids. And when they're not able to do that, that's when the conversation often turns to home education. Yes, so what I found is parents who are new to this idea, they often do what I call school at home, and they feel it's often a comfortable first step. So they try to replicate what was happening at school at home. One way that they do this is just buying the same curriculum that schools have. Another way that they do this, and something that's also a growing trend, is signing up for these online schools that actually get public funding. So they are removing some of the elements of school that didn't work for their child, which varies tremendously. However, they still have to follow the state guidelines as far as testing and some other things like that. But it does serve other advantages, such as young people who are traveling a lot due to their interests or passions and whatnot. So this is the one end, which is school at home, either paper curriculum or the online curriculum. Now, what I find is after they've been doing that for some time, they start to move toward the unschooling spectrum, and the parents whose kids are leading more of an unschooling life and learning through life and learning naturally, this seems to be working so well for them. So now I have this group where we have new people to home education in the group, experienced unschoolers in the group, all talking together. And what I see is that parents eventually start to move more toward a less structured unschooling approach, where they're doing what I call child-focused learning, and they're really looking at what their child loves and also helping expose their child to what they might love, and then helping support them to explore that further. And one important difference, sometimes people say kids need school because we expose them to so many things in school. So how could it be successful outside of school? And what I like to say is schools not only expose children to things, but they impose those things upon children. Because exposure is simply saying this exists, and would you like to try it? And then if the child doesn't like it, they're not forced to do it. But in school, they are forced to do it. And now with the Common Core standards and the narrowing of the curriculum as a result, almost every student is pushed down this academic path toward college, where college is not the answer for every child. And I don't mean it's just not the answer for blue-collar workers. I mean, there are many careers that don't require a college degree, and we're unnecessarily forcing children all down the same path. I personally have many family members who have never gone to college and are very successful. I have a director father, a sound engineer father. I have two. I have a mother who is an accountant. And college is not necessary for success for many, many careers. And I really do have a problem with imposing this upon all of our children rather than exposing it to them and giving them more choice. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons that I see families who begin school at home drift more toward an unschooling approach is because many families began home education because things weren't working in school. And I'm actually writing another guide it will be called something like Why I Left School, because many, many families have a story, either why their child left school or why they made that decision for their child to leave school. So when you duplicate school at home, you often haven't got away from those things that you were trying to escape from. And then you discover that your child doesn't learn at the same rate as the state says they're supposed to. Some things they might be highly accelerated at, and some things they might just not connect with. And if they're so into something, let them, go and explore that thing that they love. And so what I see a lot of parents experiencing is they're kind of fighting with their kids to do things that their kids don't want to do anymore. Well, there's other things that their kids absolutely love. So they start to move toward letting their children do what they love and move away from this idea that every child must move at the same rate and the same pace. And when you're doing more of an unschooling approach, you can learn in the world, not locked in a home and not locked in a classroom. So these children are doing amazing things, really incredible apprenticeships and volunteer work, but not just that, actual real work in the world as well. So they're starting businesses, College is something that many young people actually find that they're drawn to because you get to choose what you're studying, and many home-educated families' children are starting college at the age of 14, 15, 16 years old. Not necessarily the traditional path, but just in a way to explore classes that they love, and if they choose to go to college down the road, they'll already have many credits under their belt.
Mm-hmm.
Technology plays a very important role in educating young people today because in the past, you had to go to a place to get knowledge and resources. You had to go to a place to connect with people. Today, with the internet, anything you want to learn or know can be brought not only into your home, but into your lap through a laptop or into your hand through a cell phone. So you don't need to go to a place anymore to find out information, to learn something, or to connect with people around the world. So we really have to think twice when we don't have a need to go somewhere for the learning. So kids or adults from all over the world of all different ages can pick whatever they want and study, and they can form what I am now calling social learning circles. So it's finding people who are interested in what you're interested in and putting together a group however you want to. My go-to place is Facebook because it's very simple, but there's a million different options for this, and studying with people around the world. I love Google Hangout because it allows up to 10 people to talk together face-to-face for free. And then, just online communication using something like Facebook, where you can collect information, you can have discussions, you can share documents. And then, as we know, with the open education resource movement, many colleges are putting their curriculum online for free. MIT is a big one, Berkeley is a big one. So I have one student who's featured, young man who was a student, who is featured in my Working Home Educators Guide. And he went through all of the MIT, I think, algebra classes and a couple other classes, all the way without any real teacher. And I said to his mother, how is he able to do all this without a real teacher or other students? And she said, that's just the way he learns best. So I'm not saying that works for everybody, but the material and coursework is certainly available, and it's certainly an option for people. So it just brings the learning right into the hand of the child. And finding those resources now is very easy, and quite a few of those resources are free, and more are becoming free. Something I say often is that schools will be left behind if they don't update their outdated practices. We need to embrace the fact that there's technology, that the role of the teacher needs to change dramatically. We don't need to have everyone come together at the same time at the same place to hear a lecture. Lectures should and can be recorded by either the professor who's teaching the class or the teacher who's teaching the class, or you can allow students to listen to someone else's lecture. Kids should be able to move at different rates at different times. There's no need for that not to happen. And there's really no need for us to continue grouping kids by what Sir Ken Robinson calls date of manufacture. Kids should be grouped by what they learn, what they love, at the rate they learn and love. And technology finally makes this happen. So I really think that schools need to become learning centers and places for students to study. And I think it would be wonderful if schools can provide documentation and evidence of learning as a young person might need, but they can get to that learning in a wide number of ways. And depending on the student and their circumstances, they shouldn't need to come to the school at the same time every day, because information can be accessed outside of school. Now, a question that comes up a lot is, what about the students who don't have digital devices or internet access? That has to be a primary focus of the government in the 21st century. We need to allocate funds for students who don't have digital devices to have them, and for those who don't have internet access to acquire the internet access. That can no longer be questioned. As many people know, we spend billions in testing. That money needs to be moved from testing and toward technology tools that will help prepare students for the real world.
Mm-hmm.
So the testing craze in America and other countries is really hurting our teachers. It's great for elected officials to brag about successes. It's great for the mega billion-dollar publishing industry. Many people don't realize that the Common Core standards were started by publishers, and there is a ton of money for publishers to make off of these tests. Now, the thing is, the tests are assessing outdated learning that no longer matters, because this information that the kids are having to memorize and regurgitate onto a test, that's not relevant in the 21st century. What we call cheating in school, we call collaborating in the real world. When kids take a test, they have to remove everything off the walls in their school or cover everything up. They're in these stark rooms under fluorescent lights, being forced to take a test with pencil and paper, which are not a part of an updated type of work style for many of our kids who love using digital devices. And they're just assessing things that really no longer matter in the real world. There are authentic assessments that can be given to kids, and it's really just assessing what they do every day, because kids are in their schools doing work every day, and the teachers know how to analyze and evaluate what they're doing. Tests are the least effective way to assess a student. So I like to say school life should prepare students for real life. And in the real life, we take little or no tests ever. And that should be how we're doing things in school life. There's little or no testing assessment. Now, certainly we evaluate the performance of people in the real life and jobs, and we certainly can be doing that with students. But we don't need to do testing, and testing now has made a system where our kids are very stressed and depressed, and our teachers are very stressed and depressed, and the principals are very stressed and depressed, which is not a recipe for a successful school system. The testing booklets in many states now come with directions on how to handle vomiting and crying children. We don't want to be subjecting our kids to this. This is not good for the children, their teachers, or the principals. And it's really now forcing only people who are now able to be comfortable to do this work to remain in schools, because many people are leaving. It's very hard. They don't want to leave their kids behind, but it's too difficult to watch this sort of thing happen in schools. So what some people are doing is looking at how to make a change from outside the system, because as much as many of us are trying within the system, you're often silenced. Your job is on the line as a principal, administrator, or teacher, and parents are kind of shooed away and told, if you go to a government school, you have to follow our rules. Mm-hmm. So the testing is something that everybody knows is wrong, and I just find it shocking that we live in a country that's imposing something upon children that educators know is wrong, parents know is wrong, children know is wrong, even our president knows it's wrong, yet we're still doing it. The biggest challenge that public education is facing today is doing things the same old way. We're kind of tinkering around the edges, changing things here and there, but we really need a dramatic shift in what happens in school. I mean, there's certain things, I really enjoy the writing of Peter Gray, who is a researcher. There are certain things that we take as a given that aren't a given, such as the fact that the ability to read and write has to happen in a classroom at a certain time with a teacher, and things like that. When we study people like him, we find that reading can happen naturally, writing can happen naturally, and people say, how can we have so many kids go through high school and still be illiterate? What's happening is that we're forcing kids to learn before they're developmentally ready, and then we're associating negative things with their inability to read before they're ready. Now, it might be that they're not developmentally ready, or it could be that they don't speak the language, so of course they're not reading at the same level of other students. Or it could be that they just don't have a home environment that supports their reading. But regardless, we have to honor the pace of students' learning. And so the way that should affect our schools is we need radical shifts. And to do some radical things are often difficult. And unless we get rid of the assessment by testing, everyone is going to be handcuffed, because the schools that are doing the greatest things are not eligible for public funding. So the only way that you can be eligible for public funding is by doing everything in the way things have always been done. So the greatest obstacle to reforming ed is the testing, really, because once we remove the testing, then we can start educating in really innovative ways. And this already exists, and it has existed for many years. However, these schools are not eligible for public funding. So we can take some lessons from some of these incredibly innovative schools that are doing great things for children. There's so many models. There's models like the democratic schools, the Montessori schools, the Reggio Emilia schools, the North Star Teen Centers. There are just so many great examples. Now, if we allowed those sort of schools to be eligible for public funding, then many kids can have rich learning experiences where they're not being grouped by data manufacturer, where they are able to learn in the world, experience their passions, and that's really what needs to shift. Now, there are some models that do this. The school-wide enrichment model is a model that I worked very closely with, and it's all about honoring children's talents, interests, abilities, and learning styles. However, with No Child Left Behind and the testing, there is really no room for this sort of learning model. So we've really just moved to almost a strictly test prep curriculum, which is unfortunate. So the short answer is, to transform our education system, we have to kind of separate the government from the schools and the government from the assessment equation, and let the community assess schools, the students assess schools, the parents assess schools. They know when their children are learning. They know when their children are happy. And many of the models that I just alluded to, such as the Montessori and the free school, democratic schools, they have assessments, and they have ways to prove that what their children are doing, they will be very successful. And I think we need to take the hands out of the control out of the hands of the government and into the hands of the teachers, the parents, and the children. Online learning is not a trend. It's really what's here to stay. It's the idea that you can learn whatever you want, anywhere, anytime, and through some of the best educators or experts or lecturers in the world. Now, when we start to talk about online learning where the school is an online learning school, there are advantages and disadvantages of that. Advantages are you can learn on your own time. It doesn't have to be at the same time every day. Additionally, in many rural areas, it takes a long time to get to school. So you're saving perhaps 2-3 hours a day in commuting time so that you can learn. Disadvantages are that you still need to be grouped by date of manufacturer. You still have to take the same government tests. And I've evaluated many online learning programs. In many cases, they just took what was happening on paper and digitized it. So we have kids who were bored in school, and now they're bored taking their classes online. So what we need to do, I believe, as far as online learning goes, is make these classes much more engaging and relevant, give children much more choice in what they learn, and provide for them a variety of ways to prove that they have demonstrated mastery of the learning that they're trying to demonstrate mastery of. I also think that not every student needs to demonstrate mastery in all the same areas. And as students start to develop what it is that they're interested in, I can see something where, you have a student who has gone down a science path or a journalistic path or, a traditional college path. But it shouldn't be this kind of narrow path that we're now putting every kid through, which is the college readiness. That's not the way every kid wants to go. And there are options that kids should have available to them so that they can learn the things that they think might be relevant to their lives. So it's interesting because many of us realize that one of the functions of school is to kind of babysit young children and keep teenagers off the street. So when you have programs where they're trying to save money by closing the school down for one day or so, what are the parents going to do, and what's the community going to do if one of the purposes of school was to watch the children and also keep them off the street? What I think makes a lot more sense is for schools to have very flexible schedules and flexible learning options so that students can choose to take classes on site or online. Once we start to give a lot more choice and let the kids decide when they're going to come, you will find that instead of imposing it that every kid is off school on a certain day, people will be choosing these schedules that really work quite well for them. So I think what we need to do is give kids a lot more choice. I don't think that school should happen at the same time every day. I think that buildings should be open for longer hours. Schedules could and should be flexible. And in that way, we'll have kids in school less, but it will be in a way that the family owns, the children own, and they can really design learning that actually is customized to the student rather than standardized to the system. When it comes to homework, our kids are in school all day. And I believe that when they're out of school, they should have that time to connect with their family, friends, explore their passions, and do what they love. I don't think that we should be taking any more time from children. I do think that we should give them time in the school day where they can do the typical things that we think of when we think of homework. However, there's something called the flipped classroom, which some people may have heard about. And that means that instead of homework meaning that you're doing work at home you're watching lectures and whatnot. I don't believe in that sort of method because I don't believe we should be stealing time from family and friends at home. But what I do believe is that we should be allotting time for children during the day in the school where they are perhaps in a library or a learning commons where they have independent time to do what we would typically think of as homework. Because really, young people should have time to be young people, be free, play, explore, and have a great time. So if we wonder, well, when will they do that quote unquote homework, there should be time in the day for kids to learn independently and freely. If we're watching these lectures as a flipped classroom model looks like, that should happen at the school. And there should be different sort of independent periods that kids can sign up for that I believe would look very much like a library. And we should have more time for kids to learn freely in school, study independently. Someone who I read a lot of when it comes to the topic of homework or the topic of learning away from school is Joe Bowers and Alfie Kohn. And they both do some amazing writing as far as the idea of homework goes. So those are two people I strongly recommend that anyone interested in making a case against homework goes ahead and takes a look at. So there were several years that I worked in the education system where I really thought we were moving toward innovative practices. The school-wide enrichment model, which honors children's passions, talents, interests, abilities, and learning styles, was really taking off, or other models like that, which kind of have passion-driven or passion-led learning. And in those cases, kids were really owning their learning. They were doing amazing projects. They were connecting with the real world and doing real world things. They would learn, they were connecting here in New York with organizations like Rosie's Kids. And they would take kids that were interested in performing and dance. And many of those kids actually went on to perform on and off Broadway. They were taking programs with music, and they were going to perform. There's an official program here in New York City where you can perform and get like licensed, and you put out a thing to get money, and the kids were performing and making money. And kids were doing art and having art gallery displays where people could buy their art and raise money for other wonderful things that were happening in the schools. once we started becoming so obsessed with testing, these programs got pushed to smaller and smaller blocks of time. They're now pushed to after-school programs, and it's really nearly impossible in the current climate to engage in innovative practices when everyone is pushed to the same standard, which is measured in the same way by outdated tests. And teachers do know about differentiating instruction, and we talk about differentiating instruction, yet we have a one-size-fits-all standardized test. So how do we really assess effectively when it's just not possible to differentiate learning when everyone receives the same test at the same time? So unless we get rid of these date of manufacture, outdated tests, we're not going to be able to have an innovative society of children today. Now, where I'm seeing a lot of these innovative practices, unfortunately, is outside the school system. And I'm not saying unfortunately for those children, because I think that's great for them, but I'm saying unfortunately for the children who are in the school system. They are not able to engage in these innovative practices. They get to do it a little bit before the tests, and they love it, and their teachers love it. And I've talked to the teachers and the students, and they say, but as testing comes, all of this ends, and all of our time is spent preparing for the test and then testing. And then after the test, it's teachers in most places that grade the tests. They pull the teachers from the school, and so the kids still are not doing meaningful work. So I think that is going to be a big step toward helping our schools become more innovative. Abolishing the tests will help our schools become more innovative, and assessing with authentic measures will enable our schools to become more innovative. So one of the things I like to do when it comes to home education is first just inform people that it's a possibility, because many people just have no idea. And then I like to collect great stories of people who are home educating and what happens to their children, because so many people are concerned, if I home educate my child, am I taking away possibilities for my child? So I've written many articles about what happens when you home educate, such as the fact that colleges seek out home educated students. So if that's the route you want to go, that's a possibility. I share many examples of incredibly successful people who were home educated, and then I connect them, that's why I have these groups, to other parents whose children are home educating. And now we have more and more young people who are grown home educated adults who are also telling their stories and are just doing incredible things. And when you really think about what you need for success, I can break down anything that they hope their child can do. And when you think about it and you really break it down like that, you find that whatever you hope for your child is possible, and even more so outside of school. So that's what I like to help parents understand. And really what's most powerful is connecting them with other parents and their children who are having these great successes, and then just sharing the writing about it so that more and more people know, and also speaking about it in places. Mm-hmm. I had sort of heard of homeschooling like everybody else. I never thought about it very deeply. I thought people who homeschool might do it if their children had illnesses. I knew there were some religious people who did it, although I didn't even think about that much. And I thought, people who had a life where they travel a lot, or actors and actresses. I had done some acting as a kid, and there was someone on the set. So that's how I thought of it. And then I met someone named Kate Frickus, who was a grown unschooler, and she had reached out to me saying, I've been reading your stuff, I think I'd love to collaborate. I think we have a lot of really interesting things to offer each other. And I said to her, I don't know what unschooling is. I don't think I'm a good connection for you. And she said, no, we'll talk and you'll really find it interesting. So I said, all right, I'll look into it. So she lives here in Manhattan, and we started talking, and she started sharing some more information with me. And I started asking her questions about how you learn to read and write without school, and how do you survive without testing and things like that, and how do you do things like dating, the typical school stuff that happens. And she started answering questions, pointing me toward resources, and at that point, just a whole world of information that I never knew existed opened up to me. I started reading people like John Taylor Gatto, John Holt, Ivan Illich. I started connecting with many of the leading voices in home education, like Sandra Dodd, Lorette Lynn, and many, many others, Linda Dobson, Wendy Priestnese, and reading what they were saying, and then finding from other parents and young people all of the amazing things that they were doing, that they were learning, the incredible creations from these kids, the innovations from these young people. I also started a group for teens who were not in school called School Free Teens, and just to hear some of their conversations and how they're doing things. It's just all incredibly impressive. And everything I had been taught in school about school, and I mean in schools of education, I found wasn't true. Like, you don't need to go through this sort of prescriptive curriculum to learn different subjects. And in fact, myself personally, I should have known this, because after I took any class, once I memorized and regurgitated onto the test, it was gone. I graduated high school and college knowing very little of anything that I was exposed to. So it all really seemed to make sense. The things that I know that I love are things that I ended up doing on my own. The reading that I did on my own and the writing that I did on my own. The opportunities that were made available to me are things that I did outside of school. I mean, as far as if homeschooling can work for any family, it can work for any family who is able to provide basic support for their children. I mean, we know that there are some very disadvantaged families who are barely able to stay on their own 2 feet. So no, for those families, I don't think they're going to be able to manage with home education, because they're struggling with, and I'm talking about families who are struggling with things like addiction, and a variety of other problems. But for the basic family, as I wrote in the Working Home Educators Guide, there are so many out-of-the-box ways to do home education. It doesn't have to look at all like that school-at-home thing or sitting at the kitchen table. And people can collaborate with other people who are doing this and have shifts. And, when you're home educating, it doesn't need to happen at a certain time each day either. So I think that the community can really be brought into it, other family members that sometimes people don't think about. Many families who home educate have grandparents involved, aunts involved. Great aunts and stuff like that are also wonderful resources. I wrote about a woman who had a high school dropout work with her child on days that she had to go to work. Sometimes the parents bring their child to work one day, find really great opportunities in the community. So if a parent really wants to do that and they are not that disadvantaged as far as other issues in their life, then it's certainly something that more families can do than may realize that they can do. I don't think that public education is threatened, because there really is, I think, always a need for public funds to help educate young people. It does threaten the same way of doing things, though. And I do feel and believe, as more and more people start doing this, as we start to learn the successes from home educated families, that I hope that public education won't feel threatened, but that they'll learn some lessons from what's happening in home education and incorporate that into the educational opportunities that can be available for all children. I would hope that public education would reconsider being compulsory and allow families and children to opt in to the learning as they feel works best for their children, so that learning can be customized to the child and the family rather than standardized to the system. Mm-hmm. So it's my hope that public education would feel inspired rather than threatened by home education. The most important thing that we can teach kids about learning is really helping them know how to find and discover their passions and connect with others who share their passions, talents, and interests. And there's so many ways now with technology for them to connect. So I think that one of the most important things we can do for young people is help them establish what I like to call a personal learning network. So they're connecting with others, not just who happen to be born the same year as them, not just who happen to be born in the same place as them, but they're connecting with others around the world who share what it is that they are passionate about, what they love. So we're helping them first connect with those people and then learn with those people. So the number one thing that as educators we can do is help young people connect with others who love what they love and also discover and find how to learn about what they love. So it's not about learning content or a subject. It's about really learning how to learn, finding those resources, and connecting with others who share your passions to develop these personal or professional learning networks. And we should and can be doing this at very young ages. It's not difficult, and every educator should know how to help their children do that. So I think what we need to do to help learning become more meaningful is help students engage in authentic work that is worthy of the world, not just work that's to be handed into a classroom teacher. If given the opportunity, young people love to do work with a real audience that is meaningful in the real world. So I think if we start showing young people ways that the work that they do can be worthy of the world, meaningful to the world, that they can make not only their lives better, but the lives of other people better, that's really going to be a key to how we can begin transforming and even revolutionizing not only education, but our whole society to be moving toward a better place. Often people can't imagine a world without tests and how you would assess if a student was successful, a teacher was successful, or a school is successful. There's something that I work to help create with Joe Renzulli and Sally Reese from the University of Connecticut called a personal success plan. And a personal success plan allows you to customize learning to the student. So you have not only the classroom teacher, but other people important in the young person's life help determine what success would look like for that young person. They determine their goals. The goals are measurable. They determine how they plan to meet those goals. Also, a role of the creation of the personal success plan is to find mentors in the community. They can be family members, but they can also just be other people in the community. Or, you know, when I say community, I don't even mean an actual place, just the community of the world. And so it empowers the young person to determine their own goals, what their own success is, and for them to measure their success. The teacher's role then becomes helping students achieve success. The parents ideally are involved in the personal success plan as well. And then we measure teachers and students by how well they have met the personal success plans. And we can measure the school that way too. The personal success plan actually can be automated as well. So you can look across the school. You can see how well students are doing, teachers are doing, and schools are doing in helping students achieve personal success. The other really nice thing about it is when you start to collect things from students in something called like a talent profile or interest inventory, you can then, even within your school, find young people and teachers in the school that share the same passions, talents, interests, and they might not have even known that. If you have parents do these, then you can start involving parents in those passions, talents, interests, and whatnot, learning styles that the students are engaging in. So the personal success plans are just a wonderful way to measure success or assess children. And then Along with the personal success plans, we can be supporting kids in creating authentic e-portfolios. And I don't mean by that something that looks schooly, that has letters A, B, C, D, or numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, or 88% or whatnot. What I mean by an e-portfolio is something that a person could actually use for academic or career success. So this can be a link that a young person can send to someone when looking for an apprenticeship, an internship, or a job, or when applying to college. And these should not be locked inside of a school. They should not be connected to a school. They should be owned by the young person. There are many free ways that you can do this. Google Sites is one tool that I use. Wikispaces is another tool. It's completely free. The student owns it, and they're capturing the wonderful things that they have done that are authentic. So when we take that now to assessment, we can look at what kids are already doing. If a kid is writing a blog, say, we can assess that work that already is being done. It doesn't have to be taken out of context. As far as looking at something like reading with assessment, you simply have a kid read at various reading levels, and you can listen to the child's reading, and there are standardized ways to look at the record of what they're reading. It's called a running record, and measure what reading level they're at. You can do that at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, and every year, and you can see how fast the child is developing. So that's some examples of authentically measuring reading and writing. What we must keep in mind, though, our developmental levels are not really controlled by teachers, and forcing someone to move faster than their developmental level is detrimental. So it's not really this idea that the teacher is great because these kids moved ahead so fast. You know, so you're measuring, but it could just be measuring what's natural. But those are a few examples of authentic ways to measure kids without testing assessment. Mm-hmm. And then allowing kids to do things in the real world and getting a letter from the person they did an internship with, apprenticeship with, or work with, that can also be evidence of learning or mastery. So those are just some of the ways that we can assess kids without taking tests. Another thing that's growing is gaming. And there are certain games, and by the time you're done with the game, you've mastered a certain type of learning. A lot of the simulation games are wonderful for that. So that's another area that is really engaging for young people, and it assesses them without torturing them with pencil and paper tests. So I think that what it means to be educated is when you have achieved a place in life where you are in touch with your passions and talents and you're living them out, and you really feel like what you're doing is meaningful and worthy of the world. My personal experience was very frustrating because I went through high school, I went through college, I did it very quickly and I got good grades. And at the time I was 19, I had my high school diploma, I had my college degree in hand, and I had no idea what my passions, talents, and interests were. And I realized that no one had ever bothered to ask. So I went through all of this schooling, but I had no direction. And some people say, how is that possible? You have to pick a major in school. But I did something many people do. I just figured out what teacher I liked the best, what class major would allow me to get out the quickest, and I picked that. But it had nothing to do with an alignment of my passions, talents, interests, abilities. And I think that to be truly educated, our schools, if our schools want young people to be truly educated, they need to help the young people develop and discover their passions and talents, and then work on those so that they can find work that's meaningful in the world. And that doesn't always mean working for someone else either. It could be finding their own thing in their own way to do something that is worthy of the world. And once we've done that, then I think we've truly educated young people.